Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for allowing me to come and talk to you this morning. I will keep it quite brief. I did ask this morning which version do you want. You can have the 4-hour version, the 8-hour version, and I said no, you have to do the 20-minute version. So I will try in my best to get this done in 20 minutes for you. Now, I've heard a lot this morning about, costs and everything, and about the importance of looking at auto markets overseas. One thing, and I've been in Asia a long time now, that when you go to Europe, there is a perception in Europe that Asia doesn't have the same quality as they produce in other parts of the world. And that is a perception I've tried to destroy when I've gone in there, because we do have the same quality here in Asia. And one of the problems we have, though, we have this mindset that when we want to do our casting in the foundry, we just look at the cost of the materials we buy. What we don't look at is how much per ton do we pay for those materials, because you have to take into account the scrap and everything else. Scrap costs money. If you walk round the back of a foundry, and that's what I always do, and I look in the scrap bins, you can find these huge piles of castings that have come back. That is your money. You're paying money to put that in, and all you're getting back is the scrap value. So what I want to try and do here is to try to illustrate to you that the fact that you don't have to use the same old things. Everybody in the world uses barium calcium inoculants. They are not the best. You use more of them, and you don't get the same results. So I will try to demonstrate the fact that we can do things to give you lower scrap rates by looking at the chemistry of what you do. So, very briefly, we'll look at the history of iron. Now, as you're probably all aware, iron is probably one of the oldest recycling industries in the world. Ever since man started to produce iron, he's been able to realise he can melt it again and put it into another shape. So really, we are a very good industry on recycling all of our rubbish. So any car that you discard will probably end up maybe on your dining table as a knife or fork. So it's very good. And it's a very old industry. I mean, it goes back to at least 5,500 BC. So 2,500 years ago, people were making iron. So, and it's really over the last, 60, 70 years that really the iron foundry business has come into its own, with the developments of inoculation in grey iron and the development of ductile iron. So if you look at inoculation is relatively new. Although we have been making iron for a long time, it wasn't until an accident in the 1920s that we found out that by putting an additive into iron, you got a good structure, and that structure gave the properties that you really wanted. You didn't have this, maybe it'll break or something like that. And it was a total accident. There's a guy who had a foundry in the US called Meonite. He got a ladle full of iron and he put a shovel full of floor sweepings on there and found out his structure was good. Analysed it and found out he was putting calcium in there. So really, if you look at the way that it's all come through, that inoculants, bit by bit, have developed into they are now. But one thing has never changed. Inoculants will fade. Don't think because you've thrown an inoculant in there, it'll last forever. It doesn't. It's like everything else. It only has a finite life. And that is due partly to nucleation. If you think of iron as a living, breathing thing, what is the one thing all living, breathing things need? Yeah? Oxygen. If your iron has got no oxygen, it's dead. If it's dead, you can do nothing with it. So please, when you're looking at making iron, make sure you have plenty of oxygen, because it's the oxygen that creates the nucleation process in your iron. Inoculation. Really, after the 1920s, people have studied it quite deeply. And in Elchem, we have many learned scientists, which I'm not one of them, but we have many learned scientists who know a lot about how an inoculant works. Basically, all it's important to know is that if you put the right amount of inoculant in, what you do is you change the chilling characteristics of the iron. And really, that is what an inoculant does. People can give you fantastic explanations. They can give you all of these very long formulas. But all you need to know is, if you put the right amount of an inoculant in, you put the right inoculant in, you'll get the right casting structure out of the end. These are some of the active elements that you can find in inoculants. There's not many more there. The only one I haven't put in is bismuth, because bismuth is not a true inoculant. Bismuth is a chemistry changer. So therefore, it doesn't work the same way as an inoculant will. But the basic ones, you see, calcium, probably the first element ever used in inoculation. Then in the 50s, a barium-calcium combination was discovered by the people in the States. Strontium was developed for the cupola foundries, people making grey iron. British Cast Iron Research Association in the 50s found out that strontium gave a fantastic effect in grey iron. Aluminium. Now, aluminium, everyone says, ooh, you can't have aluminium in iron. Aluminium in iron gives you pinholes. Wrong. You need a certain amount of aluminium in iron, because if you don't have it, what happens? You end up with a structure, well, you end up with a material you cannot inoculate, because aluminium is extremely important in the nucleation process. So you do need to have a small amount in there. And like anything else, a small amount is good. Too much, and you will have problems. Zirconium. Zirconium's great in your inoculants, because quite often some of the recarburizers you buy, and you tend to buy on the cheap side, you don't really know what's in them, because when you ask your supplier, well, what's in my recarburizer? And they can give you some carbon, some ash. So how much nitrogen's in there? Well, no, we don't analyze. So it's good to have a little bit of zirconium in there sometimes, because zirconium can help reduce the amount of defect you can get with nitrogen. So you get, and also what it will do in grey iron, it can help reduce the length of the flake. So it's a very important element. Cerium, we always use cerium as the top end of inoculants in ductile iron, because it's one of the best you can use, because it gives you a really high nodule count when it's used in a good nucleated iron. Lanthanum, some people use. We don't use lanthanum in an inoculant. Why? Because research has shown us it's slow acting. And what you want in inoculation, something that's fast. It's got to go like that, and you want your structures to form. Lanthanum takes time. So if you've got a very slow cooling thing, maybe it'd be okay. But for normal automotive, normal casting production, it doesn't work very well. Manganese, you will find in a few of the inoculants. And the reason that's put in there is to reduce the melting point of the inoculant. So what it will do is, normally most inoculants will melt at around about 1320. If you put a manganese addition in, you can drop an extra 60, 70 degrees off that. Can be important if you're running at very low pouring temperatures. Inoculants fade. As I can say, I'm not sure how clear these graphs are, but what you'll find is as soon as you put in the best time to have your inoculation is here. If you have your ladle and you're wandering around, your foundryman has his cigarette, he just wanders around and he takes time to cast, by then you've lost a lot of the effect. So for instance, say you're putting 0.5% inoculant in there, and it takes you 15 minutes to cast. Half of that inoculant you may just as well have thrown it on the floor, because it's not worth anything to you. So really what you want to do is, and what I always say to people is, get your inoculation as close to the casting as you can. If you don't, then you're going to spend money you don't need. As I say, you see here, and really, inoculants are inclusion promoters, and that's basically what the structures are. And as you can see, as soon as you put it in, it starts to fade out. After 10 minutes, you've lost 400, what was I going to say, about 80% of the effectivity of your inoculation. These are the various ways of putting it in. We tend to use preconditioners a lot now to ensure nucleation process. Some people put in transfer ladles, some in pouring ladles, and some in stream. But as you see, the amount you need as you get it closer to the mould reduces down. And if you're all concerned about saving money, that's where you need to be, in the lower end. You want to use as little as possible at the last possible moment. And also, what happens is the potency of the inoculant, very important. Because what the inoculant can do, certainly in ductile iron, it will promote more nodules. And when you have more nodules, you get this expansion phase within the iron. This expansion phase will take out shrinkage. I've gone into foundries where they've had massive shrinkage problems, and we've been managed most of the time to get rid of that shrinkage by using the correct metal treatment package with the right inoculation together with a good nodularizer. So, if you look at it, proof is in the pudding. If you use a standard ferrosilicon, and many people do, the chances of shrinkage in your iron increase, especially in areas where it is difficult. You're feeding a thick section through a thin section. Very difficult to get at. So really you want an expansion phase in the iron. Ferrosilicon will give you some nodules, but not enough to give the expansion. Calcium barium, which is what a lot of people use, again will increase the nodule count, but you're still getting quite major shrinkage in the middle. But use a high quality, high potency inoculant. Look at the nodule count goes up, shrinkage goes down. So it makes a massive difference. And the amount you need is much less. Say for instance you're looking at a calcium barium and you're using a calcium barium in the ladle. Maybe you want about, I don't know, 0.4, 0.5%. If you use a stream inoculant of cerium, you'd use about 0.1%. So the cost is nothing. In fact, it's cheaper to use a more expensive stream inoculant than a cheap ladle inoculant. So a lot of the R&D we've done, and we've looked at this from all sorts of things. We've got lots of distinguished people. They've issued papers on it and everything else. And what we do is we know that by putting the right metal treatment package together, by using the right type of inoculants in the right type of proportion, we can give you as good a casting as you can get. If you've got 5% and most of it's shrinkage, we can probably bring that down to 1-2% if you give us a chance to. So the trends are that although barium calcium works, we tend to use it more in other applications now. Less and less of our barium calcium are used as a primary inoculation. We may use it, or the sole inoculation, we may use it a little bit in the primary, but in the secondary now we're trying to push everyone to higher potency to save money. So, these are some of the factors when you come to choose an inoculant: casting section, nitrogen content, shrinkage tendency, how long are you going to hold it, what type of properties are you looking for, what temperature you're casting it, what type of treatment you're using, and what is the composition of the base iron. So all of those are very important to understand when you choose your inoculant. The quick case study here, and this was a CMO. I think you're probably all familiar with these type castings, used quite often in turbochargers and things like that. Very prone to shrinkage and chunky graphite. What we did here was, this was the conventional material practice when we went in there. They were using quite a high rare earth, and they were using calcium barium. And they were getting chunky graphite and shrinkage. What we did was, we changed the understanding the process, we changed the magnesium ferrosilicon to one that they could use and it would not promote chunky. We took out a lot of inoculant and just put them in a high potency inoculant, and what happened was chunky went, shrinkage went, and they were quite happy. So if you look at the processes, we did all this with thermal analysis as well to understand what was going on, and we use that an awful lot. Tells us all about your iron. If you see one of our men come in and he's carrying a red box, it's not a bomb. It is his thermal analysis unit, and he's trying to make sure that he knows exactly what your iron is before he does anything. So really, and I'm getting close, I'm only 5 minutes over this. I'm only 5 minutes over, man. So really, we're not saying that calcium barium doesn't have a position. But what we're saying is please don't just look at the price of the inoculant you buy. We know that, the type of inoculants we promote are much more expensive. But you can save yourself money. Because don't think of the raw material cost, think of your final casting cost. Because every casting you scrap is a casting you can't sell. So it's money in your pocket going into the scrap bin. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.